a bodybuilder who has long arms, then lats are naturally going to be a strong point because they recruit them very well. They have good levers. So straight away, you're going to increase. Not only will it give you a pump and you'll feel them, but they might also free them off enough. That alone is probably going to bring the training stress on your nervous system down maybe 10, 20%.
All right, and we're live. Hey guys, thanks for joining the show today. Got Tom and Naomi Sheppard on with us today, and we were able to connect kind of a little bit through social media, but found Tom and Naomi on through some of the Elite FTS and Sam Brown's podcast. I think Naomi, you're on there recently, right? I'm not, I think maybe both of you guys were. And talked, had some presentations last year at Swiss. Going to be doing the same this year, so thought we would try to steal some of your expertise, steal some of your thunder before Swiss in a couple months.
Oh, absolutely. Go
for our audience. So special treat for our audience today. But yeah, thanks for jumping on.
No, thank you for having us.
Because what time is it where you guys are at right now?
Midday, half 12.
Yeah, so here in the States, we're in Michigan, so a little bit north of Elite FTS. So we're probably, I don't know, 3 hours or so north. We're it's about 7:30 a.m. So it's
it's early.
That's why you're drinking coffee then.
There you go. Yeah, usually it's like usually we do a lot of our recording at night, so it's a flop of our times, but it was well worth it. Yeah, well worth it. Happy to have you guys on. So well, yeah, we'll kind of jump into just a little bit of some brief introductions and stuff, and then we gotta get lost in the weeds at some point, I'm sure. So yeah, walk us through, like maybe start with you, Naomi. Like how'd you get started into this wonderful world of training and all that fun stuff?
I mean, I've been competing for like 9 years now in powerlifting specifically. I was actually in biochemistry research originally as my main role, and I was kind of like coaching people on the side, but I swapped to strength coaching like full time like 6 or 7 years ago now. Yeah, so I mean, it was something that I was just really passionate about, and I wanted to work with people directly. I'd kind of, I enjoyed doing research in the lab, but I just wasn't getting the same thing back from it, and I wanted to work with people directly. So yeah, and I was kind of doing a bit of stuff on the side. We were running a powerlifting team in our local area. I was helping friends and family. So I would just, I just decided to just dive in and do it full time and not look back since. So,
awesome.
It kind of fits nicely with being able to push the competing side of powerlifting at the same time. So yeah, like that's obviously a big part of my life too. Takes up a lot of my time, but I can share my own passion and, share that with other people with coaching. But yeah, I mean, my powerlifting achievements kind of show how hardworking I am. I've been competing on an international level for quite a few years. I started doing pro competitions maybe like 3 or 4 years ago now. My best performances were in the States last year. I did the Ghost Clash in Miami in February, and I won the whole thing.
Nice.
So broke the all-time world record in my weight category. I squatted 578 pounds, I think.
Wow.
Whatever 262 kilos is.
And I did that in the 148 class. So yeah, wow. I mean, I've kind of focused the last like 3 or 4 years competing raw with wraps. But I might spend a bit of time going back to raw before I jump back into wraps. So I've kind of had a little bit of time out since last summer, just been dealing with a bit of a back injury that I've been dealing with for a few years, but I've like finally figured out what it actually is. So I've been working with Brian Carroll recently to fix that. So yeah, my goal is to get back on platform later this year or early next year. So we'll see. Yeah.
Awesome. Did both of you were both of you in the powerlifting kind of circuit when you met, or was that something you?
No, we met stereotypically at the gym at university.
Okay.
She probably caught me eyeing her up while she was squatting or something, and then one thing led to another.
There you go. Well, good stuff. Well, and then Tom, how about you? Can I give everybody out there just kind of a little overview?
Yeah. So my degree is even less relevant to strength and conditioning. I was actually studying marine biology at university because I'd been and trained as a scuba instructor for a year and was potentially going to do that. Came home, studied marine biology. I was already training and stuff at that point anyway, but then started doing an S&C coaching internship alongside my degree. Naomi did the same thing.
Yeah.
So we were coaching like the rugby team, the football team. I was doing some stuff with the MMA guys, basically doing their strength and conditioning work in the gym, doing their programming, coaching their workouts. Then when I got to the end of the degree, I made the very quick realization it's a lot easier to get a job as a personal trainer than it is in marine biology. And I was already way more passionate about it at that point anyway. So I did my personal training certificate, as everyone kind of does, to start off. And
Sure.
but I want to say I don't like using the term self-taught from there because I've had a lot of help from a lot of people, but my degree in science definitely helped make me a better coach then, because it teaches you the skills that you need to read research papers, be analytical, be critical, so on and so forth. So that really helped kind of maybe elevate my knowledge base quicker than maybe the average person who hasn't been through that process. We started our powerlifting team a couple of years after that, had a lot of success there. Along with Naomi's own achievements, we had a lot of lifters winning national titles, British records, European records, people going to European championships and all that type of thing. And then it really just kind of snowballed from there. A couple of years later, we started working for Tib Army and Christian Thibodeau. So we're coaches for his company now. We run his online coaching platform and a bunch of other stuff, writing articles and training programs for that website. And then more recently, connecting with Elite FTS and Dave Tate, we've made a lot of content for them, a lot of which hasn't been released yet. They're kind of drip feeding it out, which is great. And hopefully, like I said to you when we were off air, hopefully by the end of this year, we're going to be over living in Ohio, doing more for them in a kind of more permanent or full-time basis as well.
Yeah, we sort of did like we spent 3 months out there in the winter.
Yeah.
So we did like a lot of filming while we were out there, and it was just great to be there. And I think for us, it was kind of like a bit of a test. Like we've always wanted to move across to the States just because, you know, we've met so many people like coming over for events and competitions, and there's just so much more opportunity, and there's like so many ways that we could push ourselves more so than we can do here. So I think, and especially like being associated with a company like Elite FTS, you know, they're all about educating, you know, the future generation and trying to pass on as much as possible. So I think, you know, we always want to share what we've learned as well and learn ourselves even more so. So it's a great environment to be in.
Yeah, for sure.
For both of those things. Yeah.
I think there's just the market in the US is just so much bigger for what we do, or you know, all of us do. And I think people just have a lot more respect and take it a lot more seriously. Like when we were at Elite FTS for a few months, we had quite a few people like drive whatever number of hours to come and train with us at the weekend. And like,
12 hours.
oh, will you drive? If I come down for the weekend, will you take a look at my squat and all this type of stuff? And you know, people are willing and happy to do that. Whereas in the UK, if you tell someone they got to drive an hour or two to do anything, they ain't gonna do it.
Yeah.
So like it's nice. You almost feel like you feel more respected and more appreciated for doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Because people just take it that little bit more seriously. And I don't want to sound disrespectful to the UK or the UK market, but I do just think the US has always been a little bit ahead of us in when it comes to strength and conditioning in general. And I just think that shows. Then the kind of further up the chain you go and the more high level people you work with, I think it just becomes even more obvious, if you like.
Yeah.
I think that's because it starts in the education system.
Yeah.
You know, our sports and education at a young age here is so different to, you know, the systems you have in place in the US. Like it's just not even comparable. So it's kind of nice to have been like a little bit a part of working with younger people as well coming across. It's just totally different, you know?
Yeah, I mean, like you guys have got, you know, high school and college football teams that have better gyms and strength and conditioning facilities than like some of our Premier League soccer teams. You know, it's just that much more ingrained into the culture, and it makes it a better place to be when you do what we do, basically.
Right. Yeah. No, it makes sense. I think it's a good point too that you mentioned about, you know, having some education grounded in science, just in general, like the ability to read and understand research, especially, I mean, you know, I'm going to date myself, but I was like pre-social media, you know, in the field. So now seeing it, like, I mean,
harder.
oh man, I was getting messages from Justin the other day because he was just so frustrated over this. There's a big sucralose article out there,
Oh,
and
great.
no one reads it because I think, if I remember correctly, the amount of the toxicity of sucralose was something like, it was either 90 or 900 times the amount you'd have in like one sitting,
Yeah.
typical person would have or something. So it's like,
Yeah.
would you guys just read the study and look at dosages, look at participants, look at the time period, blah, 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 blah. Like, you got to go through the methods of a study to understand
The
what the
I
claims
think
are.
the studies on aspartame were always the best for that. Like, oh, aspartame's carcinogenic and it's going to do this and it's going to, it's like, man, like, I think one of them that found an increased rate of cancer in rats, you'd have to sit down and drink, I think it was like close to 1,000 cans of Diet Coke a day for weeks
Right.
to get anywhere. It's like, if you're doing that, then cancer's probably not your biggest problem anyway.
Yeah. Well, and you guys know, it's somewhat similar in the training world, because I went to Wayne State here in Michigan. They have a pretty good kinesiology program, but you could always tell, all right, who's funding this study? What's your bias? Like, what was your initial findings you were trying to get, and then are you trying to get your doctorate? Like, whatever the person who published it there was still ethics involved, but you got to read the methods. Say, is that really a conclusion I agree with? Because I think that's what I love about science is you can read another, article, and they're trying to show, it's never like one for one. They're trying to show some form of correlation, and you could kind of try to debunk it. And then if you can't, then you're like, all right, well, this is maybe a method I can apply in my toolbox, right? But you kind of like
absolutely.
take a little more critical eye at first, but that's like the norm in the sciences, right? Where it's like,
And I mean, the biggest thing, obviously, you got to reading the methods is the bit no one wants to do, because if it's a 40-page paper, usually 25 of it is the methods, and they don't want to sift through that shit. When actually, it's really important.
right.
But actually, like the other important thing a lot of the time then becomes like the statistical analysis they do afterwards, because sometimes things that come out as statistically significant really aren't.
Yes.
And then in our world, some things that actually are significant will not come out as statistically significant. Like one of the papers I read, I think it was last year, basically looking at fasted cardio versus non-fasted cardio, did all the analysis, etc. It was a decent study, in fairness, as far as these go. But it came out and it said there was not statistical evidence that there was a difference in the amount of fat that you would lose between doing it fasted and not fasted. But if you actually looked at the results of the group, the fasted cardio group lost, I think it was like 1.2 pounds more fat in 21 days. If you take your competitive bodybuilder who's 6 weeks out and you can say, hey, do you want to lose an extra 2 pounds of fat over the next 6 weeks just by doing the exact same cardio but fasted? He's going to go, well, fuck yeah.
Right.
Like, don't tell me that's not significant.
Sure.
So I think just a basic understanding of the methods and how they do statistics and how they can be skewed is very, very important when you're reading these things.
No, actually, I think that's a pretty good transition to a little bit what we're talking about off air. So for those who don't know, I was fumbling over my harebrained memory of 20 years ago, trying to spark some discussion. So I think, one of the things if we can transition to it, I know Justin said this. I think John Rivas has said this. There's a few people, Dave Tate probably said this, where it's like in powerlifting, the training is so precise and so well thought out, but like you walk into like most bodybuilders in the gym, like it's more like, what are you training today? This is how I feel today. Right. So I think a large percentage of our audience are bodybuilders, and I think one of the things I'd like to get out of these type of episodes is so they can walk away with a better understanding of how to program or program design, because I think that's a huge part of it. And then of course, if there's any translation to other aspects of our audience, have that be powerlifting, strongman, just athletes out there, college, high school, etc. But the one, if we can kind of start, like I think a big thing to get people's attention is, you mentioned Christian Thetabu. You were doing work with him. I was kind of talking early on that, like, I recall in the early 2000s, there were some segments, articles, etc., where he was talking a lot about like weak point training, and you know, the differences between like doing like eccentric versus concentric, like overloads in certain phases and stuff.
Yeah.
But just from your experience, I guess we can start anywhere and go everywhere. You know, how would you, if you're just kind of starting off, let's say, you know, a bodybuilder had like a weak point of their back or something of that extent, you know, what are some things that come to mind kind of high level as far as how you would start to approach their current training program?
Yeah. Well, I'd say the first thing that you want to address is we are always quite big on like measuring athletes' body proportions as
Mm,
well to start with, because a lot of the time you can tell where an athlete's kind of natural dominances and biases are going to be just from that.
Yeah.
So, for example, the longer your arms are, usually the more lat dominant you're going to be,
mm,
the less upper back dominant you're going to be, because the lever arm for the lat is so much longer that a lot of your pulling movements are going to become lat dominant. They're also going to become less bicep dominant. So then straight away, even if you don't know the bodybuilding athlete very well, a lot of the time you can do an analysis like that where you look at their body proportions and you can probably predict, 80% plus of the times where their weak points are going to be. And then based on that, you can base their programming then on where their natural weaknesses are. So for example, if you have a bodybuilder who has long arms, then lats are naturally going to be a strong point because they recruit them very well. They have good levers. So straight away, you're going to increase the amount of trap, rhomboid, rear delt based pulling work in their program. And
mm,
also, if they have long arms, they're naturally going to recruit their arm muscles less. So whereas some guys might be able to get away without having an arm day or with doing very little isolation work for their biceps and triceps, the longer your arms are, the more isolation work you're going to need, because the less you're going to recruit them in compound-based movements. So just right from the get-go, a basic little analysis like that of your wingspan, right, to your height and the length of your upper arm compared to your lower arm can actually tell you a lot of what you need to do in terms of your training straight away. Then I suppose the second step after that would be, does the athlete have good motor control with the muscle groups that they're lacking in? Because, I mean, you can do as much volume on a muscle group as you want,
yeah.
but if your motor recruitment pattern is always to essentially avoid using it, then you're not really going to get anywhere with it. And that's where a lot of kind of like eccentric and isometric methods can become really helpful, not necessarily because they give you an increased amount of muscle growth, but they teach you motor control. And especially the isometrics teach you how to flex or contract the muscle and
Yeah.
feel it working. And a lot of the time, that's the first step in addressing a weak point, is getting them to be able to contract it, flex it, feel it working. So then when you start increasing the volume on those bigger lifts, that really are going to help them grow because they can move some bigger poundages on them. They're actually able to recruit them better rather than just favoring their natural biases all the time.
Well, but don't I just show up to the gym and whatever feels good, I just lift as heavy and hard as
Yeah,
I can all the
absolutely.
time, right? Isn't
Yeah,
that?
you
I
do
thought
that,
that was
man.
that's
Yeah,
what the
absolutely do
PhD's
that.
in, right?
Yeah,
There's your PhD, right? Just
yeah,
keep
I
putting it
know.
on and no,
No,
that's a great point because I just want to kind of try to walk backwards on that. You know, so when you mention that, if they had, say, the lats that were really dominant, could contract better, could you kind of maybe just, and again, this is high level make believe time right now, right? I'm sure there's thousands of things you'd look at, but I got a bunch of questions. My first though would be, if you're trying to do the rhomboids, you know, lats, etc., like how would you integrate? What type of movements or movement patterns would you integrate into that program to maybe offset that lifter with a longer arm, say, for example, that has good lat, like a lat dominance?
yeah. Well, the first thing that you want to do is, if you look at their current program, if you don't want to make too many changes, you want to take the movements they are doing and just try and tweak them so that we get a little bit more recruitment in those areas just to start with. So, if they're doing something like a seated row, you might want to move them away from a supinated grip or a neutral grip or a row that's pulling low to the sternum. And you want to
Mm,
get them doing like a wide grip row or a row that's going to get them pulling higher up towards the lower ribs or the sternum, that type of thing. So it could be swapping like a bent over dumbbell row where they're rowing back to their hip. It could be a dumbbell or a barbell row where they pull straight up in a straight line with the elbows more flared, something like that. Anything that you can do to just tweak the recruitment pattern a little bit in favor of it is a really easy win. For in that scenario, we'd have to make a lot of changes. Same as, for example, if their quads are weak, then you get all their squatting work can be done with heels elevation, narrow stance, high bar, front loaded, anything that's going to buy. You don't have to change any sets, reps, etc. Then you just have to modify those things a little bit. Now, if we're looking at like phase one, if you like, of fixing a weak point, then the best thing to do is to put in completely isolation-based exercises for the weak points you want to bring up and put them early in the program or the work so that they're done when they're fresh. Because again, a lot of the time, a big problem you see with guys when they've got weak point stuff is they always put it in at the end. Like, oh, my forearms are weak, my calves are weak, my abs are whatever. So they just chuck it 10 minutes of whatever the fuck it is at the end, hoping that that's going to do it, right? But especially if it's a weak point that's based around the fact that they don't naturally recruit it or use it very well, it's more important that you do it at the beginning when your nervous system is fresh, you've got more concentration, you have more resources available so you can focus on it more. The rest, if you're trying to catch up a weak point, that should be your priority. The rest is kind of on autopilot at that point, just drifting along. So put it first and put it in as regularly as you can. So like if it's, something like cable rear delt flies, maybe like an incline shrug on with dumbbells, something like that. Put them in your program like 2 or 3 times a week minimum. They don't have to be exhaustive, remember? Because in phase one, we're not necessarily just trying to spark all that growth. We're trying to set up the foundation of us being able to use that muscle better in the future forever. So the point is, get a pump, get a good contraction, teach yourself how to use those muscles. And then, for example, if you've got a back day afterwards, then you've already kind of pumped up your rear delts, your traps, whatever it might be. They're a little bit fatigued, a little bit of lactic acid, which actually helps you feel them working anyway. So then when you go into your seal rows, your seated rows, whatever it might be afterwards, straight away, you're going to find it easier to then also use them in those bigger movements. So that would be my advice for like phase one, if you like. Tweak the movements you're already doing and then put in movements that specifically you feel really well in those target areas. Doesn't matter what a textbook says, recruits them. Is you have to be able to feel it well.
Yeah.
Put them in well and think of it more like practice or learning, almost like someone would do posing practice. Right. It's almost like flexing against load practice. Get yourself recruiting them better, probably for the best part of 3 or 4 weeks, maybe like one training block. And then you can actually start to up the volume in a more meaningful way on those muscle groups once you know how to use them properly.
No, I think those are all great points. And there's probably like 17 questions I had while you were talking, but you answered most of them, but towards the back half of it, there's just a ton to unpack there. That's awesome. Yeah, I think like you said, I've heard of like you prime that movement a little bit, right? To kind of get the blood flow into it, or that area, I should say, so that you can recruit better during your more compound lifts. That's a great point. Cause I think I had that beat in my head by some pretty smart physical therapists that were doing a lot of competing like Olympic lifting. And in my scenario, it was like my rear delts, just rounded forward, just typical shot put, discus thrower, football player. I trained back sometimes even twice a week in rear, but just couldn't get everything back. And so they were talking, and a lot of what I did, I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. Again, is very granular, but was more I'll use like TRX bands before shoulders to get like I'll do just concentric on TRX bands to get to kind of avoid like my bro science of it is, trying to not like overload it too much, but get enough stimulation in my rear delt so that every movement I'm doing, they're nice and contracted and can support the movement. Yeah. Similar to what you're saying, I guess my question is, would you use all of the above between eccentric, concentric, isometric, and some of those, I'm calling them prime movements. If there's another word that's better, chime in, please. But before they go to those, main compound lifts?
Okay, yeah. I mean, in the motor learning phase, if you like, so phase one, whatever.
Yeah.
Isometrics, especially for a bodybuilder, isometrics in the contracted position probably work best.
Okay.
Purely because you're able to contract harder and get a better feeling for it at that point. There's nothing fancier than that. It helps you accumulate a little bit more lactate because you get a bit of an occlusion effect, which can then help you afterwards. The only thing beyond that would be if you're doing any movements where the muscle's going into like a stretched position. So like, say you're doing like a power raise for readults, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Doing them with a slow eccentric, especially where you spend more time in stretch position, that can be useful in this phase specifically because it's going to give you a little bit more muscle damage, which actually is going to be a good thing because A, from a hypertrophy standpoint, but B, also, again, it's going to make it just a little bit sore enough so that when you go back to those main movements, you're going to feel it better. And also, a lot of the time, a weak muscle is often a tight muscle.
Mm-hmm.
So again, with a lot of these guys, if they've got weak points, quite often those muscles are also tight. So doing primer movements that put them in a stretched position can also just be beneficial for them from that point, because maybe the muscle's not firing 100% out of a protective mechanism. So this is where sometimes you could put in like loaded stretching before they're lifting. So like if their lats are weak and they've got tight lats, doing like weighted hangs. People like Chuck Sipes and stuff have used these things as main movements, but doing like a 2 or 3 minute weighted hang, purposely almost trying to like overhead press the bar away from you, stretch the lats under load, might actually, not only will it give you a pump and you'll feel them, but they might also free them off enough that then you can recruit them better in all the work that you do afterwards.
No, I think the thing I want to stress for people out there is in that phase, right? Because people will hear you say something like, "Oh, tomorrow I'm just gonna work that in," right? It's having a little like, let's slow down, put a little bit of thought into this, or hire a coach, right, like yourselves, to get you out of your own way. I mean, I brought it up a few times about like prep or dieting that I've used Justin, but I've known his methods since the early 2000s and have some acronyms behind my name and all that, but I don't care. Like I'm going to screw it up because it's myself.
Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, it's very hard to be objective about your own training, isn't it? Because you've got your own biases, you've got the stuff that you enjoy and the stuff, and usually the stuff that you really need to work on is the stuff you don't want to do.
Right.
And I think it's almost worse sometimes as you're a coach because you can almost logic your way out of doing anything.
Oh yeah.
Like, if you really need to work on your hamstrings, but you can logic away out, well, hamstrings are involved in this movement and blah, 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 blah. And you can try and justify to yourself 100 different ways how you can just keep doing the shit you want to do.
Right.
So I think it's almost even more important as a coach who has the ability to bullshit themselves more, maybe, that you have someone actually be able to call you out on that.
I think with any sport or anything that you're doing, it's really important to be strategic and have a plan. And like if we're talking about bodybuilding specifically, it's all about symmetry. So if you're just kind of going in and working hard in the gym, it's not enough, really, is it?
Right.
Like we said, even just everybody looked at their body proportions at the beginning, and you're always going to have weaknesses just physiologically. No matter how much you could try and change those, you're still going to like. For me, I have shorter limbs, which makes me a great powerlifter, but I'm constantly always doing core work because that makes my torso longer. I'm always doing glute and hamstring work, and like doesn't matter how I've been lifting for like 13, 14 years. Those just tend to always be like my accessory movements and things I have to focus on just because of the way I'm built. If I wasn't strategic, I wouldn't make progress.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
and just with that, like the body proportions, if you know those at the because a lot of you work with guys who are competing or want to compete, and they're like, my legs always look skinny compared to my upper body or whatever, and you're like, well, you do these measurements, it's like, dude, your legs are 60% of your height. Like you have very long legs. I was like, you to fill out that length, they're gonna need to be huge.
Right.
You shouldn't have been training your legs once a week this whole time.
Yeah.
Right.
Like your legs to look, because people need to remember as well what is desired on a bodybuilding or a men's physique stage or whatever is not necessarily proportional.
Right.
If you did a balanced program, that isn't necessarily how you'd end up looking, right?
Right.
So you need to think, well, what's the end goal? And then how do I get my own structure to look like that? Like in the example of this guy who had pretty long legs who wants to compete in bodybuilding, like he's going to need to do probably 50 to 100% more leg work than someone maybe who's built like Naomi, who's got naturally shorter legs, can build her legs very well from just basic squats a lot of the time, and they look full and big relative to her body all the time.
I think it's a great point because there's a lot of templated programs in bodybuilding, but people are not taking into consideration maybe like genetics
Yeah.
or limb lengths, their structure. Now later, I think if you get the right coach, they will, or later, they start to realize, like from feedback from judges and multiple shows, they're like, oh, duh, this is the third time I was told this, like maybe something has to change. And again, I think there's a lot of, smart people and they're doing things, and there's a lot of different areas where maybe in bodybuilding it's a little more precise than, like, for example, like nutrition, where the training probably leaves some to be desired specific to that person. I remember one thing that comes to mind is uh when Phil Heath was competing, and he would like try to sneak in arm workouts for the Olympia because he wasn't allowed to train arms for something like 5 weeks or something crazy, because they would respond so well compared to everything else. They were trying to like proportionalize it. So it's almost like the reverse, like don't do as much as this. We're going to do more of these areas. And even someone at that level, that dominant in the sport was struggling with specific for his physique type training. Right. So,
I mean, and then again, at the end of the day, like, we all have biases that we enjoy, and most of us are doing this stuff because we like it.
Yeah.
So you tell a person who loves training that they need to train less in any capacity, they usually are not very happy about it.
Right. No, it makes sense. Well, I'm interested to talk. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, I think at that point you just kind of have to make the decision of what you're doing it for. Are you doing it to compete and succeed, or are you doing it because you like it and you just want to enjoy being in the gym? And if you want to succeed, you have to be really strategic and maybe do the things you don't enjoy, and like not just follow someone else's program. You've got to make it specific to you.
Well, it's the same advice I give to my daughters and some high school athletes that we're fortunate to help out from time to time in our community, where we're just like, what do you want to do? Like, you're young, have fun with it, and just enjoy the process of training and competing, but you're going to lose sometimes, you're going to get beat. Or is this more like, I want to do what it takes to win? Like, it's going to suck. You're going to put yourself in compromised positions and harder, different drills that you're like, oh, I missed this shot 37 out of 40 times. Like, well, you got to keep, kind of working through that. But I did want to transition or stick on, blocks or phases, because you mentioned earlier this beginning phase of, say, about 4 weeks. It sounded like, what if someone's out there, or even if you're coaching them, would it just, is it generally always around 4 weeks, or is it kind of, how would you determine the time frame of when you go to another block?
Say that.
I mean, it really depends on the person, right? Because everybody needs deloads in their programming at different stages. I mean, rough guide would be somewhere between 3 to 6 weeks for most people. Some people even get away with a bit longer. But when you're first starting out with someone, I would usually say 3 or 4 week blocks. Keep it shorter while you get to know
how they respond.
How they respond to the training. That you don't want to dive in and destroy them in the first block.
Sure.
It's kind of almost like a testing phase, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And in like this scenario, if we're talking about bringing up a weak point, the goal is for things to change quite quickly, hopefully. So we don't want that integration phase to take 3 months.
No.
So we want, by the end, if the program's done properly, by the end of that 4-week block, they should be feeling those muscles better. They should be catching up. So then it is time to move on to the next stage. If you've got a guy in the off season doesn't have any weak points really that they need to work, although show me a person with no weak points, maybe you can give them a program that's 8, 10, 12 weeks long, that's progressive in some kind of nature, but doesn't need tweaking. But in most scenarios, if you're fixing a weak point, there's going to be stages to fixing that weak point. And the length of the block is just really determined on how long you think it's going to take to achieve each step of that process. So like in this example, trying to get them a bit more neuromuscularly efficient, for want of a better term, really shouldn't take more than 4 weeks. Neurological changes happen a lot quicker than structural muscular changes. So then the next stage after that would be like to start integrating things like pre-exhaust methods and things like that. So say you take their seated row and they're weak in their traps and their rear delts, you might have them do like a moderate set of cable rear delt flies or some kind of shrug before the row, pre-fatigue it, and then have them do their row with the idea being that they're going to recruit it better, also getting some extra volume for that muscle group. That phase where you're doing the pre-exhaust work and upping the volume a bit for the weaker points, we're still trying to get more neuromuscular efficiency, but we are targeting muscle growth more, which is going to take a bit longer. So maybe that block takes 6 weeks. Maybe that block takes 8 weeks. We don't know until they start saying, yeah, it feels really good. I can flex it. I can contract it hard. I think they're looking fuller and more pumped, so on and so forth. Maybe that phase will take a bit longer, and then you might get to the end of that second phase then, and this, everything's going well, but it's still lagging. Then you might even go in and do like a full-on like specialization block where you basically train the hell out of their rhomboids, rear delts, and traps for like a month, 4 weeks, say, and like all their pulling volume is just done on those muscle groups as kind of like a blitz.
Sure.
Finally fix the problem. And then maybe you go back to a more progressive, longer term plan after that. But with the way that we program, we generally do use shorter blocks because usually every block is addressing something that we will see progress in that time frame, which means we can then reassess and obviously then plan the next one.
You obviously have in mind what you want to do for like a 3-month chunk.
Yeah.
But you break it up because you're going to make changes based on how they respond to each stage that you're in. So yeah, like I generally will write stuff up for a longer term, but like after the first 3 or 4 weeks, you're keeping in touch with how they're getting on, and then you change that next block based on how, it's all about the person.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing about one-to-one coaching is you're making it specific to them. So
right now, when you I know you've talked about this when you were on your episode on Table Talks, deloading. How do you work that in? I know you have some interesting ways of making sure they don't know they're deloading, but
yeah, that's it, right? Because no one wants to deload ever.
Right.
There are different ways to deload. I think people, when they hear the word deload, they think like, oh, I'm not going to be able to do very much for the week. But like most plans, you can make it look like they're doing more, but you're deloading in one sense. So that's whether it's a weight deload, a volume deload, an intensity deload.
Yeah, I think the main misconception with deloading is that you need to deload the muscles, which isn't true. You need to deload your nervous system. So, whilst one way of doing that is decreasing volume, there are many other ways of doing it. So especially if you're dealing with bodybuilders as well, like the more volume workload you do, the more cortisol you release, the more adrenaline you release, and then you start down regulating the receptors. And sorry if this gets too nerdy. Please.
No, go ahead, right ahead.
Starts down regulating the beta adrenergic receptors in your brain, which are the receptors that respond to adrenaline. They're programmed to down regulate or desensitize very quickly, because if you overstimulate an adrenaline receptor, you can die. I.e., if you give someone, inject them with a bunch of adrenaline, they can have a heart attack and die. So they're programmed to be like the most sensitive receptors in the body to down regulate if they need to. So when you've got guys, especially when they're maybe at the higher levels and they're doing higher volumes, they're going to down regulate those receptors pretty damn fast. And then, we would call, what will happen is they will get the typical overtraining effects where they'll feel lethargic, they'll be stiff and sore because excess adrenaline makes muscles stiffen, especially the flexor muscles.
Start to hold water and look soft.
You start to hold water, you get water retention, all that type of thing. So it doesn't mean that you can't go in the gym and train. It just means that you need to do stuff that isn't going to release as much cortisol and adrenaline. So that doesn't mean you can't do your workout. All it means is that maybe the intensity needs to come down. So maybe instead of pushing to 1 rep in reserve or RPE 9, you need to go to RPE 7, for example. Or it could be that you need to swap your movement. So, for example, the more stabilization and the more muscles that are involved in performing a movement, the more adrenaline you'll release because the more motor control you need. So doing a barbell back squat releases a lot more adrenaline than doing a leg extension.
Sure.
Even a leg press. So maybe just for that week, you take the same program, but you do all cable and machine work. You don't do any free weight work. That alone is probably going to bring the training stress on your nervous system down maybe 10, 20%.
Right.
And unless you've done something silly in your program in the weeks leading up to that, 10 to 20% is probably all you need.
I mean, even from a nutrition standpoint, you can help.
Yeah.
If you
Right.
push it too far
Yeah.
by adding more carbs in, you
Yeah.
know, or like, I mean, this is where a lot of like free meals come in.
Yeah, 100%.
When someone starts to look a bit softer, or they don't feel as big, or they're holding more water, that's
Right.
another way of doing it. It's not, you know, there's the nutrition and the training standpoints you can
'Cause,
look
like,
at.
People always ask, like, well, what's the best way to fight cortisol? Carbs. Like, every single time.
Yeah,
It's
right,
literally the best anti-cortisol drug there is.
right.
To use them.
No,
Yeah, they're like, oh, I ate a massive meal and had like way more carbs than normal, and I woke up a lot lighter.
And now I look jacked all of a sudden. You're like,
Yeah,
Well,
you dropped all that extra water. Your body's not stressed now.
well, in a lot of in the carb cycling approach, there's different high days if they're in prep or off season. Generally on average, if it's like an in season, if you will, like once a week. But I noticed with a lot of athletes, even myself, like you'll wake up and you'll go to the bathroom a lot more, right? Because a lot, I think a lot of that extra
Just getting rid of
inflammation,
that water.
you're
Yeah.
you're flushing some of that, and then the water's going where you want it, which is in the muscle versus
Yeah.
maybe that
I mean, that's
subcutaneous
why if
fluff.
you are going to carb cycle, it's important to have higher carbs on the days where your training stress is going to be much higher.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then
Right.
keep them high when you deload.
Yeah.
Because it's not a deload if you bring your training volume down, but you half your carbs. That's probably more stressful than what you're doing before anyway, right?
Yeah.
No,
So
and I think go ahead, sorry.
So when you deload, keep your calories up, and then either bring your sets per workout down 20%, or keep the same weight and the same exercises, but bring the reps down a couple, or swap to machines and cables. All of these are different ways that you can deload the training stress. I mean, when we program, a lot of the time it's done with volume, because again, we coach a good amount of bodybuilders. We also coach a good amount of powerlifters and sports athletes. They'll tend to not want to put the weight down regardless. So if you put more in your deload week, drop the weight by 20%, do the same sets and reps, they'll tell you where to go. Whereas if you say, keep the same sets, keep the same weight, but now do 8 instead of 10, they'll do that.
Right.
So again, often the best deload strategy is the one that you can actually get them to do.
Sure.
Because they all work. It's just which one are they actually going to be willing to do.
No, I think that's a great point with the diet too, because obviously if someone's in a prep and they're 6 weeks out or 4 weeks out, they can't most likely they can't overload on carbs, at least without a coach that knows what they're doing. But I think in the off season now we're talking specifically bodybuilders in this statement, but a lot of times it's kind of like a progressive increase in calories to grow, etc. But I know of a few coaches, obviously Justin being one of them, that look at can look at that full picture. But I know of a lot of really smart, good coaches that they don't necessarily correlate the strength protocol with nutrition. So nutrition is more, layered in there, but it's not, hey, this is a deload week. What should we adjust in nutrition based on that, and so on and so forth. So I think that's a really good point, is again, what is the goal of that deload, or of that phase that they're in? Have it be a week, have it be, full block, whatever the case is. One last question on deloads. Do you usually see a need for that? Let me think of how to phrase this. So we're in a block, let's say it's a 4-week block. Are you doing it the first week of the next block?
Usually it'll be the last week.
Yeah.
Last week.
So,
Okay.
yeah, it's usually the easiest way to do it. The other way you can do it depends how your programming's working. So, for example, if we're training like sports athletes, a lot of the times their methods will change quite a lot from block to block. So when I say methods, a lot of the time we're using like different eccentric, isometric, concentric methods with them. So that will change from block to block. So oftentimes in that scenario, week 1, because, okay, now I'm doing front squats with an 8-second eccentric, which I haven't done before. Week 1 ends up being a deload anyway, because they're figuring out what fucking weight they got to use.
Right.
But actually, they're like, oh, I didn't really know what weight to use. I think like only the third set was actually hard enough. You're like, perfect, because there's your deload right there. Whereas if you're coaching guys, so let's use a bodybuilding example where maybe the methods stay the same, or they're a bit more well-versed, as in they're going to know what weights they use on exercises, even if you change them from block to block. You can't really depend on that figuring out phase in week 1 of every new block. So then we would program it as the last week of the current block. But quite often you can mask it by maybe going slightly heavier, or we'll often do something like we'll drop the sets right down, but we'll add in intensifying techniques. So, okay, maybe week 4 of your block is only 1 set on everything, but it's a top set with a double rest pause rather than doing 4 sets of 8 to 10. So the intensity is higher, but the volume is way lower. So overall, it's still a deload, but they still feel good because they went in and they lifted some heavy weight and they pushed hard. So they still kind of tick that box. They don't really feel like they're deloading. And again, like a lot of the time, that's half the trick is you've got to program it so they don't feel like they're deloading.
Right.
But we like to pre-program them in that sense, just because prevention is usually better than a cure.
Yeah.
Like if someone gets to the point where they message you saying, I feel beat up, my joints hurt, you know, I'm not sleeping well, my digestion's off. That usually isn't a short process to get rid of and fix, to get them back to that might take 2-3 weeks to get them back to where they were. Whereas just doing a slightly lower intensity week every 4, 5, 6, whatever it is, depending on the person, if that stops you getting there, then overall that's a big win.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. I was just talking to a high school athlete at the gym, and you know, he's asking like, what supplement should I take for my joints? I'm like, deload. Just like, don't take anything. Like, you know, I've watched you every 7 to 10 days pretty much max out in your squat like for the last 5 weeks. You think maybe we gotta undo that a little bit? I know you're getting stronger.
Why do my knees hurt?
Right.
Just no warm up, go in and just squat and then go home. And you're like, oh man, I wonder why they're really sore all the time.
I remember those days. Where now the warm up is just as long or longer than the actual training session for me.
Yeah.
I think it also just shows how important it is to get to know the people that you're working with from just a personal standpoint as well, because everybody deals with, you know, everybody's body deals with stress in a different way. You know, if you've got someone that's a CEO of a company, their stress tolerance is going to be a lot lower than, you know, someone who's just doing a pretty standard 9-to-5 job or stacking shelves at a supermarket. You know, the stress intolerance is going to be totally different. So I think it's also important when you work with anyone that you get to know them as a whole, not just from a physical standpoint, but from a, you know, more personal standpoint as well.
No, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because I mean, you know, I think we mentioned off air, like people looking at other people's programs or whatever, but like Phil Heath, you know, wasn't doing your job and didn't have 3 kids running around the house. Okay, maybe he did work, but he wasn't working 2 jobs and doing what you were doing. And also he wasn't doing what he's doing now when he's at the level that you're at now.
Right.
A more relevant question would be, hey, Phil, what were you doing when you were at my stage?
Yeah.
Right.
What were you doing 4 years into your career, lifting career, you know? That would be a way better. So, like, context is always so important. That people only have so much resources to put into training. And a lot of the time, especially when you get people who like training, you spend more of your time telling them to do less.
Yeah.
Not necessarily work less, as in they got to maybe work harder, but do less.
Yeah.
Because, you know, the body only interprets all stress as the same thing. So if you've got job stress, you've got marital problems, you've got a newborn, whatever, then you can't just take that on and be fine. You have something to account for that. So I think being able to tailor the entirety of the training stress and even the nutritional stress, if they're dialing down based on what's happening in their life, is a really important skill for a coach to have. And it's why it is, sometimes quite important to get them to know your clients a bit more on a personal level so you can do that.
No, that makes sense. I do want to transition to a little bit of methods, and I know this could turn into like a 5-hour recording, which we won't do that to you. But listening to, you know, on Table Talks, you unpacked eccentric method quite a bit there. Wondering, we can start wherever you'd like to start, but that was just kind of one of the things that really caught my ear. Was wondering if you want to kind of unpack like the different methods that you use in different blocks, you know, and how you approach that. Yeah,
well, a lot of the time we use eccentric and isometric and concentric methods like all year round. With again, but that's primarily with like sports athletes and powerlifters and stuff. Like Christian Thibodeau put us onto that probably 6-7 years ago.
Yeah.
When we started implementing that with our powerlifters, what started happening was they were squatting, benching, and deadlifting in some way 3 times a week. there was no injuries. They were feeling fresher. Their movement quality improved. They could handle more volume, but they were getting less beat up. So it was kind of like a light bulb moment, like, oh, this has big applications here.
Yeah.
Now, from a hypertrophy or like a bodybuilding viewpoint, they still do have a lot of kind of validity, if you like, just in slightly different contexts. Now, and actually, a lot of the time, you end up drawing a lot of parallels between like an in-season athlete and a prepping bodybuilder, because they're kind of both in the same scenario where their recovery demands are lowered. For the bodybuilder because they're dieting down, for the in-season athlete because they've got so much practice, game time, etc. They haven't got as many resources to recover. So it starts to become a matter of how can I keep their performance and their muscle mass with as little or the most efficient stimulus that I can. And then that's where some of these methods can come in really useful. So the eccentric work is better for hypertrophy in most scenarios because most of the muscle damage you get is on the eccentric phase of a movement. So more muscle damage is a good thing, providing you can recover from it. So if you're in the off season and hypertrophy phase, doing more slow eccentric dominant work is going to be a very good stimulus for it. I'm not saying you have to do all your work with it, but especially like your compound lifts, for example, or any lift where you take the target muscle into a stretched position, doing the slow eccentric work is going to be a very strong stimulus. Now, the other benefit that maybe from a bodybuilding perspective you have as well is if I'm doing my heels elevated back squats with a 6-second eccentric, I don't have to load them as heavy. I can get the same hypertrophy stimulus with
from not as much weight.
Yeah, from 20 to 30% less bar weight. My knees and my connective tissues and my tendons are going to take a lot less strain.
Yeah.
And then the other benefit, especially for bodybuilders, that tends to get forgotten a lot is that you put your tendons through a lot of work. Just because you're not lifting heavy and maxing out like a power lifter does, you still put a huge amount of volume through them. And slow eccentric work is very, very good at strengthening your tendons, which means then they're going to be more resilient and you're going to have better force transfer, and longer term, you're going to stay healthier, which obviously is a huge part of the battle, right? Because no one gets massive in a year.
Right.
You've got to be training 8 to 10 years or, whatever your individual journey is. So if doing slow eccentric work is going to give you stronger tendons and keep your joint integrity better and also improve your movement patterns.
A low risk of injury.
Then your wear and tear or your mileage, however you want to look at it, is going to be lower. So in the off season, the eccentric work is a very strong hypertrophy stimulus, has benefits for strengthening the tendons, which is great. And it gives you a way of lifting heavy, but with less weight. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but you can go less heavy on your compound movements, but still get very good hypertrophy stimulus from them. Really, for hypertrophy purposes, they don't really need to worry about anything other than tempos. Like in that table talk, we talked about using like weight releases and eccentric only reps and all these wonderful things, which are great for strength and performance. And, if you're a bodybuilder who also wants to be really strong, maybe they have a place for you. But in my opinion, all bodybuilders should be including some eccentric work in their training, if it's for nothing more than the benefit of strengthening their tendons to keep them healthier in the long run. Yeah,
and that's a good point, because there's a lot of tears and setbacks that happen, and as you mentioned, prevention is better than the cure, right? So that's a great point. I want to talk a little bit about tempos, right? So like my 20-year-old method is eccentric would be a certain amount of time, isometric, and then concentric or whatever. And I'm just doing it with my hands for visual. But so if we're talking eccentric, can you walk us through different times in that frame? 2 second, 4 second, 6, 8, etc. What are you usually prescribing in there? Then how do you manipulate that as a measure, if you will, that you're going to adjust in their programming?
No, you go ahead.
So if hypertrophy is the main stimulus that we're looking for, you really don't want to go beyond anything slower than like 8 or 10 seconds, which is a lot slower than people think it is anyway.
Yeah.
Now, we do sometimes program 10 seconds plus on the eccentric, most of the time that's when you're working with people to ingrain motor patterns. So like someone doesn't know how to squat or has a very poor squatting pattern, overhead press, whatever, then you use incredibly slow eccentrics to just basically put the brakes on them and make them feel out. And it's more of a motor learning tool than anything. So really, probably in this context, anything above 8 is probably not needed.
Yeah.
Now, if we're talking kind of in a vacuum here of what would the perfect hypertrophy rep look like, you'd probably be looking at around 3 or 4 seconds on the way down. But obviously, the thing that gets lost here a lot of the time is you can put a time on the rep, but how long is the distance that you travel?
Right. If it's a bicep curl versus squat, it's going to be a little different.
A 5-second eccentric on a back squat is very different to a 5-second eccentric on a bicep curl.
Right.
So they're different degrees of slowness. It's simple. So that needs to be remembered. But if we say like 3 or 4 seconds as a general rule, it's slow enough that if anyone said stop at any point in the movement, you would be able to stop.
Yeah.
It also should be slow enough that you can feel all the antagonistic muscles or the muscles that are controlling the eccentric phase to work. You can feel them load and flex, etc. Then that would give you enough time and attention on the eccentric phase to get the benefits of the eccentric loading, i.e. the increased intramuscular tension, the increased amount of myosin acting cross bridges, the increased muscle damage, mTOR activation, so on and so forth. Then the concentric phase needs to be not purposely slow, but not so fast that you end up losing tension. Because the problem is you have what's called like intramuscular tension, which is the amount of acting myosin cross bridges you're creating at that time. So like, let's just take doing like a speed work or a throw. Like the force output is extremely high, but the actual internal muscle tension is incredibly low because it's the muscle is moving so fast that you don't actually end up making a lot of cross bridges, and a lot of the force is dependent on momentum. So that's why like speed work, power work generally is not very good for hypertrophy because it completely lacks that element. So we need to be able to move the weight at a speed where we can still keep a good amount of cross bridges and a good amount of internal tension, but not so slow that we have to reduce the weight so much that it becomes an ineffective stimulus. So I know that's kind of like a really gray answer.
No, that makes sense.
Now,
I think there's a lot you can pull out of that.
The best kind of way of kind of visualizing it is you shouldn't be moving too much faster than what you are when you're like 3 or 4 reps from failure. So we're not on those last 1 or 2 reps where it's really grinding up, but let's say we're 3 or 4 reps from failure. The movement is still smooth. It's maybe slower than we could move it, but not very slow. That would almost be like the perfect, if there is such a thing, just, you know, deprived of context, rep speed from concentric.
Got it. And are you adjusting in these, you know, more eccentric dominant phases, if you will? Is there an adjustment to reps related to in a more concentric dominant phase, or is it kind of, you know, generally in the same rep range?
So generally we keep, because at the end of the day, we're looking for primarily like time and attention, primarily. And the stimulus we get from a hypertrophy perspective is greater on the eccentric phase than the concentric phase. The other benefit that you can get from doing more eccentric focused work is you can do less reps and get the same stimulus. So what we will generally do is we will generally adjust the tempo through the block as the variable that we like to change so that everything else stays reasonably similar. But we could, when we're in a more eccentric dominant phase, especially in the off season when we're looking at hypertrophy, it allows us to get away with doing less volume. So, you know, it might be, say, let's say week 1 might be 3 sets of 6 with a 5-second eccentric. And then the goal would basically be to do the eccentric 1 second slower for the next 3 weeks, but to use the same weight.
Okay.
That would be that's a really simple progression.
Just for people listening.
Or you could keep the same tempo and increase the reps one per week. And again, in that initial phase there, we talked about deloads. you know, if the goal at the end of the block is to do 3 sets of 8, whatever we're doing 3 sets of 5 at week 1 kind of has to be a little bit conservative, because otherwise there's no way we're getting 3 sets of 8 in week 4. But week 4 is going to be like RP 9.5, but that automatically makes that week 1 kind of a mini deload there as well.
Sure.
But then we will generally take the eccentric work out when someone is in a prep phase, because all the benefits of the eccentric phase in terms of the extra muscle damage and the extra hypertrophy stimulus that comes with that is then a downside. Then when we're in prep and we've got lower recovery abilities, we're not going to be realistically growing any muscle in our prep, at least not to a significant degree.
Yeah.
And the extra muscle damage that the eccentric methods are going to cause is actually probably going to push us over our limit of our maximal recoverable volume, or whatever you want to call it. And that's where the more biased concentric work can come in really well, even to the point of doing like concentric only work. So it could be like sled work,
yeah.
Could be carries. It could be doing low like lifts from pins, like a bench press from a pin, where you don't really control the eccentric phase, because you still get enough stimulus from that concentric phase that you're going to maintain your muscle mass, but you don't get the muscle damage that the eccentric phase brings with it that carries the really heavy recovery burden.
Yeah.
So when you've got a guy in prep who's not got a lot of calories in his system, that can be a really useful tool for. And again, that's the same thing that we do with our sports athletes. As soon as they're in season, they don't do any eccentric biased work at all. Or if they do, it's absolutely minimal, because they're already practicing twice a week, playing once a week, or whatever it might be. So they don't need that large burden to recover from. So we just take that out and put them on maintenance mode. And then a lot of their work becomes loaded carries and sled work and all that type of thing.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, because I think, like you said, there's different applications based on the athlete and where they are in their journey towards competition, or towards their goal of what they're trying to do there. So if I could take a step back to, like, just an example of an eccentric phase progression, if you will, it'd be 5 seconds in week 1, 6, 7, 8 maybe, and then would you go to more concentric dominance in most cases there phase, or what, depends on the athlete, or how would you, what would be the next hypothetical
so like
block?
I mean, the phase after that, you could even look at doing something like contrasting sets, where you alternate between slow eccentric and regular eccentric reps, for example. Usually in the context we're looking at here, we're looking at methods that allow us to increase the load a little bit. So we might move from doing an slow eccentric every rep to contrast sets or something like that. Or we might move to doing just more basic strength work in that phase with slow eccentrics. And even if they're a bodybuilder, it's still increasing their neurological capacities with basic strength work still has great carryover to their ability to produce more force on smaller movements. So what we might do then would be to go to some basic strength work. It might be like sets of 3 to 4, but keep those slow eccentrics in there as a way of moderating the load a little bit, but still getting the hypertrophy stimulus from the lower rep work. And then the rest of their workload then would be more isolation based and more higher rep based to make up for the fact that we've gone pretty heavy and pretty low rep with their earlier movements in the workout, if you like.
Got it. No, it makes sense. Well, I selfishly would like to keep you on for 3 more hours and just unpack each phase together, but but I do want to spend a little bit more time on just, both of you, where people can you walk through, just for the listeners out there, and then we usually wrap up some rapid fire stuff too. But first I want, I know people are going to want more. So where do they find you? What's the best way to get in contact with you? You guys want to walk through all that fun stuff? We'll have it in the show notes for everybody on our audio and YouTube as well. So
Easiest way is probably just Instagram. Mine's Naomi.PhoenixPerformance.
Yeah, same for me. Instagram, Phoenix Performance Training. We're really bad at self-advertising, all that stuff. So we're just on there, and drop us a DM or whatever if you need anything.
And now, do you guys do like online coaching? Let's say someone needed help programming from the States.
We do all that type of thing: online coaching, online consults, and all that type of stuff. That's our bread and butter, basically.
Okay, good deal. Yeah, and sounds like so you'll be we'll see you at the Swiss conference in October,
Yeah, for
right?
sure.
Yes, you will.
So
Yeah.
that's coming up. I know Justin's speaking there, so I'll be
Awesome.
hanging out, meeting and greeting some people while he's doing his thing. So looking forward to that.
Have you been to the Swiss before?
I don't think I have. I don't believe I have.
It's a good event, man. You'll enjoy it. It's really good for you.
Yeah,
But,
I've seen a lot of videos from it. I'm trying to remember if in the early 2000s if I went once, but or it might have been called something different, but it was a Midwest kind of guru thing that I went to. I just don't remember what it was called, to be honest. But yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it, and I got some other friends in different industries that are going to be there, so it'll be a good time.
Ken Kinnikin always says like the Swiss happens in the hallways.
It's
Yeah.
true.
And it's kind of true. Like the talks are great, but it's all the mingling in between. That's actually
Right.
like we sat down after day one with that was when we met Brian Carroll, and Bill Kazmaier just comes over. Let's just say he'd had a few,
Okay.
without trying to besmirch the guy's name, and started just telling us like crazy stories and
That's
stuff like that.
awesome.
And you just kind of sat there like, yeah, this is a little bit surreal. This is great.
I mean, it's not often that you get the opportunity to go to someone's talk and then go and ask them a question
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
personally afterwards, and then maybe continue that conversation later on in the evening.
Yeah, and that is the good thing about it. Like you might finish your talk or whatever, and then you're walking through the hallway, and people who went to your talk will be coming up to you and wanting to know more. And it's nice because you know it went down well. They know that you're interested and they want to know more. It's nice to have that time afterwards as well to be available for people.
Yeah. No, for sure. It's it's one of the things I enjoy most even about our podcast, is just
Yeah.
kind of talking through stuff and getting it out there. But yeah, everybody check that out. Again, they can always put comments in our comment section. We'll shoot them over to Tom and Naomi, and then you guys are looking to possibly, I think we said this earlier, but join the Elite FTS team in a more full capacity, working on potentially moving to the States for a little bit. Is that kind of the plan?
Yeah.
I'm in the process of applying for an athlete visa to come over and compete a bit more permanently in the US. And part of that is being attached to Elite FTS, so we'd be there in Ohio more permanently.
Yeah.
So it's a really hopefully exciting opportunity. Yeah, we're hoping to get out there
This year.
before the end of this year, hopefully before the Swiss.
Yeah, that would be the goal.
So
good.
So then when we're out there, the goal is basically just to make more content and educational material, because that's been a really cool experience being able to make
Yeah.
that. The team that they've got there that makes all the educational YouTube
Yeah.
material and stuff is
They're
great.
really- yeah,
And
really
it's
great
really
people.
nice to work with that because it makes it so easy, and then you get to reach a really good, receptive, large audience with it as well. It's
Right.
it's a very rewarding thing to do.
Yeah.
So we're going to be able to get to do a lot more of that, hopefully.
Yeah, it's great when you have production folks that can help you too. I know we've been tapping into that more. Just
Yeah.
even the events we do or seminars. I think we have a seminar in 2 weeks in Washington D.C., but we hired a crew
exciting.
to follow us around so we can package it, put together reels and YouTube
Yeah.
shorts, and then we're going to put the whole thing on YouTube always for free.
Perfect.
Like people can, it's all just about the education,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
putting it out there, which is, probably counterintuitive for a lot of people, but it just, it helps your business grow if the people following you are growing as well, so.
No,
Absolutely.
absolutely. I mean, there's so much bad information out there. You feel like you kind of have to fight back against it, right?
Of course. Well, let's unpack a few of our questions. We like to call this round shoot, move, communicate. It's a little more of a rapid fire questions. So we'll start with Naomi. So we'll start with you first. So what is your most favorite or a favorite accomplishment that sticks out to you as an athlete?
Like a personal one?
Yes.
Probably my all-time world record squat. I think I mentioned this at the start, but
Sure.
that's probably my most favorite achievement. Yeah.
And just for those listening in, if they forgot, what was that?
I squatted 262 kilos in reps, raw in reps. So it's like 578 pounds, I think. And I did that in the 148 class.
Okay. And what makes that, really special to you? What sticks out to you about that?
I mean, just to know that I've done something that no one else has been able to do before. I'm pushing up a boundary that, I almost have this thing in my head that like boundaries don't exist. So you
Sure.
want to push them as much as possible. And like I actually attempted more than that on the day and got called for depth. So I did that, and like I know I've got more in the tank. So
Yeah.
She did 600 for a double in training for the record. Because
Okay.
she will never say that, but I will tell everyone.
Yeah. There you go. There you go. That's what you're there for, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Good deal. Well, and then Tom, with you, you know, just to flip it a little bit, maybe a favorite accomplishment or one that sticks out in your mind, as far as someone you've coached, what sticks out to your mind in that?
Honestly, professional accomplishment would probably be actually getting to present at the Swiss last year. That for me was just such a highlight to be able to be around and actually be able to give a talk in the presence of people that I look up to.
Yeah.
And, you know, there was a lot of like, why on earth are these people here to listen to me type of thoughts going through my head. But, you know, to be kind of on a level playing field with a lot of the people that I would consider my mentors or that I've looked up to and learned a lot from, was just a really meaningful and kind of confidence boosting experience to me. And to be honest, like it sounds like a bit of a cop out answer, but
No, it's
for me,
good.
the most rewarding accomplishment I get is like after we do stuff like this, I get a DM or whatever from someone I've never met before
Yeah.
that says, "Oh, hey man, I watched your video on whatever, and this has really helped. I really appreciate it. It's allowed me to do X, Y, and Z." That stuff means a lot too. And I
Yeah.
know that maybe it's a bit of a cop out answer because it's not specific,
No,
but
it's good.
that's kind of why I like doing what I do.
I mean, to know that you've helped even just one person is
Yeah.
rewarding.
So I
No,
wouldn't say there's maybe one client or one thing that a client has achieved
right.
that really stands out. It's more just knowing that the stuff that I've taken time to learn and put out there actually helps people.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate that. One thing I do, I'm going a little off script here, but what are you speaking on at Swiss this year?
Oh, so I'm going to do my presentation on specialization training.
Okay.
So we mentioned it kind of briefly at the beginning there when we were talking about weak point training, but basically how you can use like concentrated loading. So where you focus on one facet of physical abilities per training block to improve either a person's capacities overall or to bring up weak points. So like for a sports athlete, it might be like, how do you program focusing on power for 4 weeks and then this for 4 weeks and then that?
Yeah.
Whilst you put everything else on maintenance mode. For for a power lifter, it might be doing a 6-week squat cycle where bench and deadlift are on maintenance mode and then cycling through that. And again, in bodybuilders, doing like body part specific cycles. That's actually an approach that we use with bodybuilders who are in prep. So you can actually find out if you've got like someone who's prepping for a show, you can actually get them to grow during their prep if you focus on their weak. So like, let's say you've got someone who's got weak shoulders, you might actually train their shoulders in some capacity 3 days a week, then do like the minimum effective dose for the rest of the muscle groups at the end of each of those 3 workouts, and then maybe a 4th workout at the end of the week. And everything else just ticks over, and their shoulders will actually grow during the prep because they're just getting so much stimulus, they don't really have a choice. Which obviously it's great because it allows them to grow in a scenario where they usually wouldn't. But also, if you take a prepping bodybuilder who's eating egg whites and ketchup 3 days a week, and they take and go, "Oh my god, my shoulders are actually getting bigger," like their adherence and how they feel about the prep just goes
Right.
through the roof. So it has its physical benefits, but I almost think the mental benefits of that approach are actually better.
Yeah.
And so it's basically how you can use specialization training to either bring up weak points or actually use it as a full training system to still train in a balanced way if you program it over a long-term approach, if you like.
Okay. Great. Good stuff. All right. Transitioning. If you had one word of encouragement so Tom, this will be for you again, then we'll ask Naomi a follow-up to this, but for you, one word of encouragement for an up and coming strength coach, what would it be?
One word.
One
Over-deliver.
one word of advice, maybe, then I'll ask for the encouragement as a
Okay.
follow-up. We'll go with that.
Honestly, I would say just always over-deliver.
Over-deliver.
There are far too many people that want to hold back because they feel like I've got this secret that no one else has, and if I give it to you for free or I give you too much information, you're not going to be my client next month or I'm going to lose something. But that kind of flawed thinking is really the whole problem with the fitness industry right now anyway. It's the fact that a lot of people rather claim to have secret information and they've got the way that's going to get you jacked, that no one, when in reality, any coach who's been doing it for a good amount of time knows that pretty much all this stuff works. You know, it's not rocket science. It all just works in different contexts and in different ways. And I think the more coaches we have that openly talk about that, the less dogma we get and the more genuinely educated lifters and coaches we end up getting, because they don't end up kind of boxing themselves in on one methodology. They realize the underlying principles mean that you can train, you know, a whole bunch of different ways. You can eat a whole bunch of different ways and still get very good results. It's more about what works for you, what do you enjoy, and what can you do consistently.
Right.
So yeah, over deliver and overshare.
Got it.
Be my mantra in that way.
Oh, good stuff. And then Naomi, for you, what would be your advice to up and coming lifter, an up and coming athlete? What would that be?
I think just because of the topic we talked about, to actually be strategic about what you're doing and plan, like what you want to achieve, like be specific and then make a plan for that and stick to it. I mean, that sounds really obvious, but
no,
it's
but
not just about training hard. It's about being smart about the way you do it.
But there's a lot there to unpack. And again, I say it kind of tongue in, like, you know, having a little fun with it. But the reality is it happens to all of us where we see XYZ pro or big lifter doing a movement on Instagram. We're like, oh, I'm doing that tomorrow, right? It's like, to your point, is that in your plan right now? Specific.
No, exactly.
This is a long haul. It takes time. You know,
I think that's actually just the main thing for success, isn't it? Being able to stick to what's actually going to work.
Right.
So just reminding yourself of your own plan and what works for you all the time, you know?
Yep. Well, and actually, that's one of the follow-up questions we have now here is, can either of you, or both of you, doesn't matter, pull out one parallel to your approach of, say, you know, training / coaching, and then how you'd apply that to like business or life, you know, like a parallel, that's something that you see kind of sticks there, that can be applied.
I mean, the obvious thing is you get out what you put in.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So like, even just from the approach of training, like what I've learned about the gym, like, you know, if I work hard, I achieve more. If I'm smart about that, I achieve even more. So you can apply that to like pretty much any facet of your life.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is everything takes time.
Right.
Nothing is an overnight success. So you've got to actually put in the hard work in the long term to achieve anything. So yeah, even just from a business standpoint, you know, like we've been doing this for years, like we've been putting in the hard work for years. It's not just something that's, I mean, I think that's the difficult thing with the society we live in now. We live in such a, like, you could click a button and get something in the next couple of hours. Like, you know, you can order food to your door. You could pretty much order anything on the internet, and everything is within one click reach, right?
Right.
And then the other thing is social media has kind of changed the game a little bit. But if you truly want to be successful and feel successful in yourself, it's all about hard work and actually doing that for the long term.
Yeah. No, it's a great point. I think that you know, those unpacking that and thinking through that is important.
I mean, just to kind of put like a bit of a thing on it, like any achievement, it's not, you know, like that all-time world record. It isn't the fact that I got that. It's what I put in to achieve that makes it feel like it's a success. So if someone handed that to me, I wouldn't count that as I wouldn't be proud of it myself. So I mean, really, it's just how you feel about your own achievements and the hard work you put in to get there.
Good deal.
Yeah,
I'd say for me, I guess this is maybe more applicable to coaches, but like humility is very important. No one ever knows everything, no matter what field. Anyone who claims to know everything is a charlatan, for a start. And you also never know where you're going to learn stuff from.
Yeah.
Like some of the biggest light bulb moments I've had with training and programming and stuff have come from people that don't work in the industry.
Yeah.
You know, people who do martial arts or track and field or whatever, you know, and you can't close your eyes to anything. And yeah, okay, 99% of what that person says might not be applicable. That one, you accumulate enough of those little gems of wisdom over time from those unusual sources, and all of a sudden you've got a lot of tools in your toolbox, you know. So
Right.
would always encourage people to just be humble and always be willing to learn, because no matter what you're doing in life, that's always going to benefit you. And just never have an ego and assume that somebody can't teach you something.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, no, good stuff. All right. A couple more questions here, and then we're winding down. So one, Naomi, we'll have you take this one first. So if you had to miss one, a meal, a training session, or a night of sleep, what would it be?
Probably the food.
You would not miss a meal.
No, but like I can't cope. Like, I mean, to be fair, the last 3 months I've not really been training as much, and I've managed.
Okay.
The sleep is probably the priority for me, because I just know that
Can't
one bad
function.
night of sleep, like, it takes me days to recover. So
Yeah.
I'd rather you miss a training session, because then you wouldn't get hangry.
There you go. So we got mixed reviews on that one.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Good stuff. All right, Tom, how about you? For you, a meal, a night of sleep, or training, or yeah,
Honestly,
training
always a training session.
Yeah.
Just over the decades or whatever that an impressive athlete is going to train for, what really does one session do?
yeah.
Mhm.
And it's the same thing when it's like, oh, should I go train today? My knee is sore. I got 2 hours sleep, whatever. Like, I'm not saying people should just cop out of their training left, right, and center, right?
Sure.
But like, one training session is not going to be the difference maker between you and ultimately what your goals are, providing you're consistent over a long enough period of time. Like,
Right.
and I think sometimes it's really hardcore, right? People like it to say like, oh, well, I've not missed a session in 3 years or whatever. But like, okay, what did you miss out on whilst you were doing all of those sessions? Or could you have maybe missed one? And there's maybe some of those sessions actually counterproductive because you felt like shit, or you were sick, or you pushed through an injury that you shouldn't have pushed through.
Right.
You know what I mean? So yeah, I would say training session there, because one training session in the grand scheme of things isn't going to make a lot, and it tends to be the thing that people overdo.
Right. No, good stuff. Well, last question we have for you. So at First Attachment, one of our sayings is, we're all in. So that's one of our taglines or our hashtags we use a lot. So the question is, when you think of all in, what is something that, in the near future here, your passion project, you're all in on, you're really excited about? Like, what would that be? Say the next, 3-6 months, etc. What would that thing be?
Me first. We've got a couple of seminars coming up over the next few months. Obviously, like we mentioned the Swiss,
Mhm.
doing one in Ottawa as well in a few months' time. We're just really trying to push our careers, I guess, and expand out into those type of things more. Also, just trying to get more work over in the US, like doing things like this, podcasts with yourself. We really just want to get our name out there a little bit more, and just
Sure.
to educate a greater proportion of people. Just because we feel like we've spent maybe a lot of time educating ourselves and maybe working hard in the shadows, for want of a better term. So just
Right.
the ability to put ourselves out there on a bigger stage, not for financial gain or anything like that necessarily, but just so that we can help more people and connect with more professionals like yourself that see things the way that we see things.
Sure.
I think for us, especially over in the UK, and again, I don't want to bash the UK too much, but the market just isn't as big over here. So sometimes you kind of feel like you're on, I say, like on a bit of an island. The UK is an island, but you know what I mean? You feel a bit isolated from
Right.
the strength and conditioning world. And that was one of the great things about going to the Swiss, was just being able to connect with all these professionals that, again, a lot of which you look up to. So if
Yeah.
I want to be all in on kind of just embedding into that community a bit better, for want of a better way of putting it.
Sure. Good deal. Naomi, how about you? Anything else that comes to
I
mind?
feel
Or
like you kind of answered that for both.
answered it for both of you?
Yeah,
Good.
I think on a side note of that is, I'm still got goals that I want to achieve in powerlifting, and I'm still very much all in. Like, I might have took a little bit of a step back, but that was from a strategical standpoint. I'm only going to be able to get better if I'm physically 100%. And, I've been pushing the last few years basically with a fracture in my spine. So if I can let that heal, then
Right.
I'm going to achieve way more. So yeah, like, I've got some big things I still, personally want to do in powerlifting. So yeah.
Well, good deal. Well, hey guys, thanks so much for joining the show today. So for all of the viewers out there, again, we'll have where you can find Tom and Naomi in our show notes. We're on YouTube for the show, as well as we'll have some reels and things we'll post just to kind of, you know, help people find this content. And then all of your places you can listen to like audio. So right now we're on Spotify, but over the next couple of weeks, we're integrating to probably 10 different platforms. So whatever people's preferences are, they can find us on there. But thanks again. Thanks so much for chiming in. I'm definitely going to try to coerce you guys into several more hours of having conversations in the near future, because it was awesome.
No, thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Time.
Really appreciate it.
All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you. Have a good night.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
This episode is brought to you by First Detachment. First Detachment is an expert formulated supplement company founded by renowned coach Justin Harris. We've combined science with real-world experience in each product. We are battle tested. Are you? Find your battle today at firstdetachment.com.